Hey, what's up, everybody? Dr. Chad with Energy Physio. Today, talking a little bit about something that we talk about in the clinic quite a bit, and it's why this physical therapy exercise is not working for most people. We get a lot of people in the clinic who have already been to therapy before, 20, 30, 40 visits, really not gotten any results, or at least not the result they were looking for. And so they show up here and, we start diving into, what all they've got going on. And there's always the conversation around, wow, this is so comprehensive. Nobody's ever told me that before. And, we always do a full body evaluation. And that's where we can really highlight for people how addressing some small deficits in other areas of the body can have a really massive impact on the pain site. Just for example, mobilizing the left hip will affect range of motion in the right shoulder. A lot of physical therapists don't know that, and they definitely don't have the time to tinker with those types of ideas in the clinic. So there's a mobility conversation, there's a manual therapy conversation, creating new range of motion, creating normal, complete range of motion in lots of joints. And that's really where we've got, the 1 degree physio idea, where we make tiny shifts in a lot of different places. But when you stack up enough of those tiny shifts, you get a massive result out of that. And that's what we do for people. But today's conversation is really about the exercise piece. Excuse me. And so, physical therapy schools want to make exercise like the biggest part of physical therapy, which I think is a mistake. And, you got a lot of therapists out there that say, I'm an exercise therapist, or I'm a manual therapist, or I'm this type of whatever. When really it's like, it doesn't matter what type of therapist you are, if your patients don't get better and they don't get better quickly. The credentials behind your name don't mean anything if your patients are not getting better. And having more credentials behind your name doesn't necessarily make you better at getting patients better. But focusing only on exercise is a big mistake. You got to free the body up to move correctly. You got to free the body up to be able to move well before you can move often. In the words of Gray Cook, move well, then move often. And that makes a lot of sense. So therapeutic exercise is what it's called in rehab, or corrective exercise. And corrective exercise now bleeds into the chiropractic space, and the athletic training space, and the strength and conditioning space, and the personal training space. And really anybody who has a computer can do a weekend certification in corrective exercise. So there's really becoming less and less separation in the market between what a physical therapist can offer and what a lot of other people who are already better at marketing and sales can offer. They can offer the same things. And so really, I think as therapists, we need to be much more diligent and focused about what we're doing and how we provide it. And, as a cash pay clinic, we get to work one-on-one with people, and we've got to really dissect some of this stuff out. And so over the past, 4 years, working one-on-one with people, we've just started to notice a lot of things about exercise. And you can see behind me what our gym looks like. So our corrective exercises look a lot different. But it's because we've realized that there are a lot of inherent flaws behind the exercise that's being prescribed in clinics across the nation. And I think it stems back to what I'm going to call exercise hypocrisy, which is, therapy schools want to make exercise, they want to bring exercise to the forefront of physical therapy in terms of these are the types of things you should do to make somebody get better. But really what happens is I think patients recognize, like, hey, you're asking me to exercise and it's clear that you don't exercise. So if you're a therapist and you're prescribing movement as medicine and you're not participating in movement yourself, you're a hypocrite. You should not prescribe movement if you do not participate in movement, right? And there are a lot of reasons behind that. One is like patients recognize you're telling them to do something that you probably have never done yourself. And the other is when you partake in exercise, when you are a student of movement and doing it yourself, it allows you to translate that onto your patients and communicate and educate in a way that nobody else can. And so to work here at Energy Physio, you got to work out. If you don't work out, you can't work here. That's just the way it is. And that's a hard conversation, a very short conversation that I've had with 3 or 4 people who have called looking for work. But we're not going to be hypocritical inside of my clinic space. It's a part of our cultural environment, and we will die by that. But kind of moving on to the next problem is everybody wants to provide corrective exercise, but nobody seems really in tune with correcting the way somebody exercises. So the research will say, well, if you do this movement, it will have this effect. But therapists in the clinic will prescribe somebody a movement, but then they won't watch them do the movement to make sure they're doing it correctly. And they don't really know what correct is because they're not participating in that movement themselves. And it just creates this big gap between what is being prescribed and what the intention behind it actually is, and what is the goal behind what is being prescribed. There's really no clear pathway for patients like, hey, look, you're here. We need to get you to here. And here are the things we're going to do to get you there. And here's why. That conversation was never part of the conversation when I was working at the in-network corporate clinic. And so, we've already got the problem of prescribing movement as medicine without partaking in the same movements as therapists. And then we've got we're prescribing you corrective movements, but we're not making sure you're doing them correctly. And when we think about corrective exercise, it's not providing some isolated movement to make a certain thing happen inside the joint or the muscle. It is, we are looking at how do you bench press, how do you squat, how do you bend over and pick stuff up, and we correct the way you do that. Now, if we need to use some type of real therapy type of hack to turn a muscle on so it functions better, we will do that. But what we have found is that when you restore somebody's joint mechanics to where their joint functions well, the muscles around it function well as a result. And then if you can cue somebody into a correct position and have them move correctly without compensation, you can restore those movement pathways in the brain without corrective exercises at all. And that brings up the big thing that happens in rehab when an exercise is prescribed. A lot of times it's an isolation movement versus a compound movement. And there's almost no isolation movements that happen in real time, real space, real life. So a TheraBand external rotation, if you had a rotator cuff surgery, you need to rebuild some durability in your rotator cuff. That's a great way to do it. But this is not going to translate into real life where you're pressing and pulling and actually doing stuff. And so the focus becomes isolated movements per the research that get a specific result in a very local location in the body. But then it doesn't translate out into the compound movements that people are going to be doing in their training and in their real life at home or at work or whatever the case may be. And so the isolation versus compound thing, it's like we're not really restoring movement, and we're not doing exercises that are going to create a global response in the body, which is what people really need. It's almost just prescribing because the research says you can do this and get this result, but then it doesn't transfer. And this is where our conversation has gone recently in the clinic, is the conversation about dose response and adaptation in the body. And what we have been realizing over time, and why strength training is becoming a bigger part of our rehabilitation process here at Energy, is that in previous clinics that I worked at and in certain settings, they're not providing enough dose to get a response. And they're not providing the dose at a high enough weight or intensity to actually create an adaptation in the patient. And that's what you have to do. And this is why strength coaches are looking at their clients and saying, don't go to physical therapy. I can do whatever they're doing for you here. And to a large degree, that is true, no matter how frustrating that might be to any therapist watching this. But the truth is, strength coaches understand movement because they participate. They understand what good movement should look like. They might not understand the inner workings of why somebody can't do it, but they at least know what movement should look like, and they're participating in themselves. They are providing compound movements, functional movements, not isolation movements. And they understand adaptation. They understand how to progress somebody from here to here with different styles of loading, or reps and sets and time and rest and all the different variables that you can adjust to achieve whatever the result is. Strength coaches understand that really well, because their goal is to create or give somebody a dose that elicits a response and creates an adaptation over time. And in the clinic, the physical therapy clinic, that is not happening. The doses being provided are too low to create a response, and therefore, no matter how much you give over time, there will be no adaptation. And here's what we hear from all the patients coming in here who have exited a previous clinic is, hey, I went like 20 or 30 times. They gave me this program to do at home, and when I came back to the clinic, they had me do that same program there. They didn't really watch me do it. They just had me going through the motions. And so what happened is, within the first week or two, they developed this program, and the program wasn't working, because if it was working, they wouldn't need to come back. They'd do better and they'd be moving on. But they were going home to do the program and it didn't work. And so they stopped doing the program at home, because people don't waste their time doing things that don't work. And then they come to the clinic and they get their time wasted doing the same home program. And all they're ever adjusting is the sets and reps of the same exercises that have not been high enough of a dose to create a response. And here is a concept that Alex Hormozy threw out there. And it really hit me in my own personal training and kind of shifted my mental gears around what I should be doing to achieve some goals that I want to hit. But it also really struck a chord on the rehab side. And the concept was this: the amount of work it takes to maintain a current state is actually relatively low. And people think it requires more to maintain than it actually does. Maintenance is very simple and it doesn't require a lot of volume. But to grow, to get a response and to actually create an adaptation is way further down the volume spectrum than people will ever realize. So what ends up happening is, I've done this for a long time, and we see others doing it now. They're doing a lot of work just to maintain their current state, because they're doing more than required just to maintain, but they're not anywhere close to the amount of work it takes to actually grow and create adaptation. And so in the rehab space, looking over at the other side is like, okay, well, they're providing a lot of these exercises, and they're providing them in doses that seem like it's a lot of work, but they're still nowhere close to create a response and an adaptation in the patient. So yeah, maybe if you continue to do that program long enough, maybe you will get a result. But it kind of draws back to the idea of doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is insanity. And we see that a lot in other areas of rehab. And so we almost do the same things in here, never. Or we're doing the same things, but we're doing them at such a high volume that it would be impossible to not create a change in the patient. And that's where you want to be. It's like, I forget the coach, but it's not doing enough work to get it right. It's doing the work enough so you can't get it wrong. And that's what we're doing here. We're doing the same things over and over with our patients, but we're doing them in a way that makes it impossible for them to not get a response and not get an adaptation and not create massive changes over a period of time. And that's really where rehab needs to get to. People need to understand the low level of loading that happens in the physical therapy clinic is only appropriate post-surgery, but you have to get people out of that. You have to expand the loading beyond the 5-pound dumbbell. You have to expand beyond the air squat. You have to expand beyond the TheraBand, whatever. There's not a TheraBand in the world that's strong enough to really create a dose, response, and adaptation once a patient has progressed past a certain level post-surgically. And a lot of people are coming in without surgery. Their bodies still function relatively normal, and they can handle a lot of stress. And the amount of stress you're providing in the clinic has to exceed what somebody is currently experiencing, or they're not going to change for the better. And so those are just some things over the last 4 years that we've been picking up on, and why our mentality has shifted so much around functional fitness and training, not for the purpose of physique or body composition, but for the purpose of aging well and becoming durable and becoming resilient and becoming like creating a preventative atmosphere around your body that just makes it harder to get hurt. And that's really what rehab is, right? Rehab is restoring somebody to a pain-free lifestyle, whatever that lifestyle is, different for everybody, but giving them the tools they need to become independent in self-care and create a body that is physically resilient so they don't have setbacks over and over and over and over. And that's why you go out in the marketplace and you see people re-entering therapy and trying it over and over again, hoping it's going to work. But the loading they're getting there, they're not getting enough of a dose to create a response, and they're not getting the adaptations they need to meet the goals that they have. So if you're a therapist watching this, think about that. If you're not participating in movement, you need to do that. If you're only providing isolation exercises, you need to knock it off. If you are providing corrective exercises, but not correcting the way people are moving and exercising, you need to figure that out. And if you are not providing loading and intensity and dosing at a level that creates a response and an adaptation in the direction your patient wants to go, you need to learn how to do that, because that's the only way you're going to get patients better and create a physicality in their body that not only can minimize pain, reduce it, and get rid of it, but can withstand it and tolerate it, and is much more resilient to accumulating pain over time to begin with. So run back through that 5 or 6 times if you need to. These are important conversations that we're having with a lot of young therapists entering the space, and why we think physical therapy may not be a great avenue. Like, hey, if you want to help people, that's great. There's a lot of ways to help people and make money that's not physical therapy. Our profession is not protected very well right now. Our professional organization is not doing us any favors in a lot of different spaces. And, so there's just some frustrating things we're dealing with. But really, as therapists, you got to take control. You got to take action. You got to get this right. You got to help your patients get better faster. And to do that, you got to know how to move. You got to teach patients how to move. You got to load them up correctly, and you got to do it in a way that they can do it themselves. Hope you enjoyed that. If you got any questions or comments, drop them down. Happy to respond whenever I can get around to it. See you guys later.